Hi folks, G3 here, and welcome to another instalment of my journey to go green. In today's episode, I'm going to be planting some sweet corn that I grew as part of a trial into the way that different pots work, and I'll include a link to that trial up here so you can see how it went. Spoiler alert, some of it went well, some of it didn't. So I'm going to be planting the sweet corn in here, and I'm going to be trialing something a little bit different, so I'm going to follow that progress. Now ordinarily, I would use a weed membrane on top and plant the sweet corn in gaps. And what that does is it's a material layer that suppresses the weeds, and you just have holes where you want the crops to grow through, so the sweet corn will poke through. It's been very effective over the last few years. But I am trialing different ways to grow the squash so that I can fit more squash in and around, because they always last us a long time. They keep very well over winter, so if we're able to grow more, we'll be able to use them for sure. So that's why I want to try growing some more. And I'm going to trial putting them in the gaps around the edge of the sweet corn, trying to train them up this mesh that I have around to stop the foxes from getting on. I'm going to use this framework to sort of hang them off and grow them up so that they're supported off the ground. And I'm going to see how that works. First things first, I'm just going to hoe the ground and get out the big weeds ready for putting these in. The thing about this soil is that it's quite fine. We haven't had a lot of rain and it's quite fine anyhow. So generally I can lift the weeds out without any problem. I don't need to use the hoe and break them, so I can just lift them out. So that's mostly what I'll do. Right, as the soil's so fine, I didn't really need the hoe at all. Just give it a rake to get it nice and even. Mostly I managed to keep big bits of chalk out of here, but sometimes there's bits I need to remove. Because this soil is so dry, I think I'm going to have to water it before I plant, because it is just so loose at the moment. Sweet corn really need to be sown in a grid pattern, not a straight line, because the cross-pollination takes place through wind generally, the pollen being carried by the wind onto the other sweet corn. So it helps to have a grid pattern, and ordinarily when I've planted them, I've kept them in quite close previously. So I've had them in maybe grids of every 12 inches, 30 centimetres, something like that. Probably the seed packets may well say to have them further apart, but that's worked for me. I think I've just done a rough count 16, so I'm probably going to have a grid of 4x4 on this side, and then I'll do some more on that side when I've gone and bought some seeds if I'm able to, or maybe I might be able to get some plants from a local nursery, and I'll do it that way, because we do love our sweet corn. It stays well in the freezer. I think we've still got 1 or 2 pieces left from last year, so it's a really good crop to grow. I'm going to make sure that the top level of soil at least is going to be a bit firmer. Obviously as the day gets warmer this will potentially evaporate off, but I don't want to run the risk of not bedding these in well and them having yet another issue. Right, I think that's enough to be going on with. One thing I find really handy with sowing is getting a graduated sowing stick like this, so it's got marks at different lengths, so you can tell the depth that you're going to be planting seeds at. You push it down to the line and you know that's the depth it's going to be, but equally you can use it on the surface, so I know that this is a good distance to have the sweet corn between, so this will give me a bit of a gauge so I can tell where it's going to go. So the sweet corn in the root trainers has grown really well, some good roots on there. I always find the root trainers really successful. That said, one of them hasn't germinated, but I think that's in part down to the compost that I've been using. It wasn't very effective. So I'll work out my spacing first. So let me see how we would go. So that would be 2 going there, 3. I want to fit in more than that really, so I'll put it maybe this far apart. That might work. And I'm going to repeat this pattern, creating the holes to put them in, And you've got the previous holes to give you a bit of a guide as well, so you don't need to do too much in the way of calculations, and it doesn't have to be exact. I've got 4 of the uneventful ones, so I'm going to put those in over here first, just to see how they do on the edge, give them more of a chance. So this one was made out of newspaper, so I'm going to pop that in here. Then in the other spaces I'll put the ones from the toilet roll tubes. And then I'll fill in around. Then we'll put these root trainer ones in. And firm that in. Unfortunately, there's some wasted ones that didn't germinate, so those can just go. Right, firm that in. Okay, so that's all of the sweet corn in. We've got a grid of 4x4. Over here I've got the toilet roll ones that I'm trialling first. Here I've got the ones that were in the newspaper, just the one, and these are all the root trainers, so they're looking a lot healthier. They've got a bit of a head start, but hopefully with these being on the outside, they get a bit more sun and they'll get a little bit more chance to thrive. Next step, of course, now will be to put in some of the squash around there. It's another day. It's going to be a hot one, so I've put on my sun cream and I've got my hat for when it starts getting a bit too toasty, but for the time being, I'm okay, and slapped it all on, so that's why I'm looking a little bit sticky. I've got the sweet corn in that I did yesterday. I have also found that I've got a new packet of sweet corn seeds here that I'm also going to plant. So I've got 30 seeds of Conqueror F1. So I'm going to put those in up the far end of the bed. It says direct sow in May. Now, obviously, I'm doing this in June. It's a little bit later, but because of the warmth and stuff, I think I'm going to be okay at getting those in, and, you know, needs must. The germination rate wasn't great, so I've got those and I'll give those a go. What I'm also doing here is I've got some blue Hubbard squash. Now, I saw these on Gardener's World. Monty was growing them and they looked really nice, so I thought I'd give them a go. I've got 10 plants that look in pretty good health. My plan for these is to dot them around the edge of where the sweet corn are, and trail them out and possibly up the netting that I've got on the side to stop the foxes getting on and onto here, and also to sort of trail them around the edge and on the lawn. Ordinarily, as I say, I would have a weed mat down for the sweet corn, stop the weeds coming through. But my plan with this is that because these like a reasonable amount of water and squash like a reasonable amount of water, I think if I put these around the edge, they'll be able to grow out, but benefit from the good level of watering that I can give this entire bed, so that they'll both benefit from having a good old soak. And I know that if I soak this area, they'll get a good drink and they'll grow nicely. That's the plan. I'm just going to mark out where I'm going to put them. I think that's okay. So I'll plant them on the outside, the sweet corn will be on the inside, and then I can trail these up the outside, and then they should be kept away from the sweet corn. That's the plan. But first off, I'm going to plant the sweet corn so that I know the spacing. Right, so I've got all my kernels and I'll start popping them in the holes that I've got. And what I'm going to do is mark them all with a plant label when I push them in, so I know where they are, and cover them over, and then I'll water them. So there we go, we've got our 30 extra sweet corn that are planted. Now I've got the sweet corn in place, it's now time to get the squash, the blue Hubbard squash around the outside. Now I need to be careful about the netting not damaging them, but there should be room for me to fit them in and them to come this side of the netting. So let me just create a bit of a hole. And I've got the squash. I'm just going to support it, tip it upside down, give the pot a little squeeze and it comes out. Got a root network in there, you can tell that I've watered it recently because these little pots dry out quite quickly, so that's why I've kept it well watered. Pop that in the hole, firm it in a little bit, push the soil around the outside. There we go. So we've got the squash that can grow up the outside, and I'll be able to train it up this netting and around here, and then the sweet corn can grow independently on the inside. There we go. I've got the sweet corn, and now I've got a load of blue Hubbard squash. There's 10 plants around the outside. I've gone and put in some extra canes just to keep the netting away from them, so they'll be protected on this side. I'm going to look to try and train them up the outside and have a little bit of support off the ground, and we'll see how that goes. Next thing I'm going to do is just give them a water and bed them in and water those over there and make sure the squash are well watered. Whilst we're having a barbecue and eating some sweet corn, it made me think, I should do a little recap on where we are with the sweet corn bed and how we've been doing with the different potting methods. So this is the sweet corn behind, and what we have here are some great plants that were grown from the root trainers. So these ones had a really good start. The root trainers I've always found to be exceptionally good at getting a good root system in place and growing some healthy plants. So that's them. Now let's have a look down here at this one, and you can still just about make out the toilet roll around it, and that plant isn't anywhere near as developed. And same with this one here. That is a sweet corn that is grown in the toilet roll tube. So it's growing okay, but when you compare it to its neighbours that were root trained, it's nowhere near as good. The final one here was in the paper pot that I made using the paper potter. So that's with newspaper, and this one is more developed than the one that is in the cardboard tube. So side by side, it's a better plant. Not as good as the root trainer one, but it is a better plant at the moment. So the paper pot seemed to be working. Toilet roll ones, maybe not quite so much. Let's just have a look at the rest of the sweet corn. I do have some gaps here. I don't think it's going to be a problem. They should still cross-pollinate. We've still got enough in here to cross-pollinate between them, but they are a little bit stunted. And the reason being is that one of the local foxes was in here overnight having a bit of a dig around, and so we lost a few of the plants in there when it was having a bit of a dig for grubs or whatever. An ongoing hazard here. Nice to have the wildlife around, and I love seeing it in the garden, but sometimes they can have a little bit of a play with your bits and pieces. So, but there we go, that's the progress on the sweet corn. We are now in the first week of August, and the sweet corn's doing pretty well at the moment. At least the original batch that I grew in the root trainers is growing quite well. So these are from the root trainers here, so they're growing nicely. We've obviously got the flowers on there. The sweet corn is in here and growing nicely. There seem to be some good corn coming on some of those. So these are all the root trainer ones here, and they're growing nicely. In here, we've got the mixture of the ones that were in the toilet roll tube and also the paper pots that we made, and they're not quite as impressive. They are about half the height at the moment. The flowers haven't developed and they've still got some way to go, so they are really behind. So what I'm drawing from this is that in future years I am going to be doing the root trainers for my sweet corn. The paper pots and the toilet rolls just aren't working. But the experiment that I'm doing for growing squash around the outside is working well. Trained to the side, I've been able to retain them and cut them so that there's only a maximum of 2 squash per runner that's going, and some of them such as the one back here is extremely large. They are blue Hubbard, this variety, so they're going to start to turn a bluey colour, and they're growing quite well. So that is the update of where we are, early August. We're now mid-September, and it's been a lovely sunny day, probably the last of the summer sun, I would imagine, for the rest of the year. But it's given me an opportunity to get outside and check up on the sweet corn and squash that we were growing. Now remember, the sweet corn was a trial of how successful growing in toilet rolls, paper pots and in root trainers was going to be. So here is an example of one that is in a toilet roll, and it's really stunted. The sweet corn kernel itself, tiny, it's not going to be edible. It's the same with the ones that we grew in the paper pots that we created. They haven't been successful at all, unfortunately. The ones in the root trainers have been. So we've got some great sweet corn coming through here. Fantastic one. The way to tell that it's ready is that the top has gone brown. The frizzles at the top have started going brown. You peel it back, and then you can see the kernels within, and you can just give them a little squeeze to check and see if a milky colour liquid comes out of them. Yep, which it is, all over me. That one's ready. They break off easily. Fantastic sweet corn. This is a lovely, lovely kernel. It'll be nice and sweet. We'll enjoy it with a little bit of butter once it's been in a boiling pan. So that's it. In future years, I'm not going to use toilet rolls or the paper potter for planting the sweet corn. I'm going to carry on with the root trainers because they were by far and away the better method for growing healthy plants with good root structure that have worked really well in this bed. The other ones, they were restricted by the cardboard and paper, just didn't work. I mean, it may well be that it's suitable for doing other plants, so I might test it with other ones, but certainly this trial of the sweet corn, it's not been successful using those, but the root trainers have been really, really good. So there we go, that's the learnings. The other experiment that I did was to grow some blue Hubbard squash plants around the outside of the sweet corn so that I could train them using the mesh netting that I've got around the outside. And because the sweet corn takes a lot of water as well as squash, I thought if I grew them together, I could water this bed extensively and they would both survive and grow well. And that has definitely proved to be the case. I mean, look at this. This is a huge, huge squash. This is blue Hubbard, the variety, because there's a little bit of blueness to the squash itself. Now these are ready to harvest. I will need to make sure that they've been sort of sun-dried just to finish them off. But I will harvest those. They will do us very well during winter. They last a long time. I thoroughly recommend growing squash, butternut squash, or in this case, blue Hubbard squash. And you see we've got a few around the outside. So they were quite successful, and I would do that again. I would definitely go and grow them around here, and they share the water with the sweet corn, which worked perfectly. So there you go, that's another tip for your growing next year. If you're growing the sweet corn, then why not try some squash around the outside and make the most of it. Blue Hubbard squash, thoroughly recommended. Well, there you go, folks. That was a bit of a long video, but as you'll have seen, the loo rolls and the paper pots, they just didn't work for me, and I'm going to be going with the root trainers. So, hope that helps you in the future. Well, thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed the video, then click the like button down below, and if you haven't done so already, why not subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you get notified when I load up a new video. Well, thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye.